What if I told you the next hot neighborhood in Columbia, South Carolina isn't where everyone thinks it is, or they're even making videos about? Well, most buyers keep their eyes on the usual suburbs: Lexington, Northeast Columbia, Irmo. There's a quiet shift happening around Columbia, and the smart money, it's already moving there. In this video, I'm breaking down the areas out-of-towners are sleeping on. And you'll want to hear this before they boom. Trust me, by the time everyone else catches wind of it, it'll probably be too late. The prices will already be out of budget. I know that this is something I get asked about just about every single week. And I'm gonna be honest, I've always said, my crystal ball doesn't give me all the answers. So I reached out to the one person that I do trust when I'm in a pinch, ChatGPT. And I found out where AI thinks the up and coming areas are. But I'm gonna give you my perspective of these areas, what I'm seeing with boots on the ground, and whether or not I agree. And let's just say, some of these are 100% spot on and you're not gonna wanna miss. Many of them even being called the next Lexington. So let's get after it. All right, so we're getting kicked off, and the first neighborhood they say is about to pop off. The Rosewood neighborhood over in Columbia. Now, I'm gonna give you what ChatGPT says about this area, and then I'm gonna roll into what you can expect for pricing, and then I'll give you my 2 cents about the area and whether or not I think it's gonna pop off. So they say Rosewood. It's close to downtown, but still maintaining that suburban feel. Rosewood has a mix of charming older homes and new construction. The neighborhood is popular among young professionals and families. Now, I will say, before I give you my 2 cents, I don't know where that new construction thing comes from. Let me dive in though. All right, so first let's get kicked off with pricing. So to give you an idea, homes sold between 768 square feet to 2,298 square feet. Homes in here pretty much were built between the 30s and 70s. You do have some random new houses in here, but a lot of it's gonna be either a house that burned down and they built a new one, or a random lot. But there's no consistency of new construction. It's a pretty established neighborhood. And to give you an idea as far as pricing, it ranged from $60,000, now that was a house that had major fire damage, could not move into it, to around $500,000 on the top end. But the average, to give you an idea, was $265,000. So before I dive into my 2 cents, when it comes to up and coming neighborhoods, as many of y'all know, things change, which is why I always tell people it's hard to predict. And I'll tell people all the time, with a lot of these, I don't know if that pop-up is gonna be in 2 years or it's gonna take 10 years. And so that's why you gotta know going into any of these that there's a risk associated if you're going in there as an investor or hoping it's gonna pop off and be able to flip this thing in a couple years. I tell people it's kind of like buying stocks with that new company. Everybody talking about, yeah, it may take off, but in the same accord, it may not. It may crash and fail. But if you wait till it's already popping off, right, it's too late at that point. For instance, I told people when we moved to Lexington, it was back in 2015. It wasn't as popular to relocate to the area as it is today. Most, if they were coming to South Carolina, we're always talking about Charleston or Greenville. I mean, people in California told us, you'll be back, you're gonna hate it. Locals often ask, how did you end up here from California? And more so, we actually moved to the Red Bank area. Many cautioned it was rural and not a popular area. Fast forward today, and it's one of the fastest growing areas. And no one is surprised when they hear a neighbor moved in from the West Coast. And honestly, California is one of the top 10 areas people are flocking to Columbia, South Carolina from, including Los Angeles specifically. Now, I had to throw in that disclaimer so y'all don't come back and say, hey, this neighborhood didn't pop off. But let's talk about it. So, Rosewood. We're over in that area of Columbia, Rosewood, Shandon, Forest Acres. And across the board, they've always been consistent. I mean, when you have these established neighborhoods like this, there isn't any room for new construction, even though ChatGPT thinks there is. All that new construction, again, is if a house gets torn down or there's a random lot. You don't have room for that kind of growth. And so because of that, you kind of just have this built-in supply and demand based off demand coming to the area because you can't really expand. Now, with the shopping centers, you see revitalization, right? They redo the public shopping center. It's a lot what you see in these older established areas. So again, I would say I would expect consistency, but I don't know if it's really gonna magically pop off any different than, you know, Shandon or Forest Acres is. I think it's gonna stay relative. Now, with that said, we talked about pricing, and anyone that's watched my videos knows Shandon and Forest Acres are significantly more expensive. And you'll notice that in a lot of these, that pricing is a big factor that weighs into this. And interesting enough, as someone that's very present on social media, I've gotten reached out to by homes.com and other publications wanting me to write articles for, you know, a website post that they were doing. And this area is one that specifically years ago I was asked about. Hey, what do you think about this area? So this one's been on these lists for years after years after years. And again, consistently has continued to rise for a numerous amount of reasons. Again, that I mentioned, people that want those older established neighborhoods and maybe don't have the budget for a Forest Acres or Shandon. Now, the only other thought with the growth is gonna be the fact that University of South Carolina, their stadium, Williams-Brice Stadium, is just down the street. I mean, if you're at the front of this neighborhood, you're talking about a mile walk down to it. And that is obviously a big hype. Like I talked about in the beginning, young professionals graduated, they still want to go to the games and party, especially with the announcement, if you watch my videos, how Williams-Brice is trying to do an expansion to be similar to the Battery. So those that are interested in that perceivably could walk down to there in the future. And so there's a lot of factors where I see especially consistency in this area, but whether or not it takes off, it's really tough to say. Again, price point is probably the biggest reason. And I'll give you one last perk of this area. Right behind me over here, they actually have a skate park over here, some soccer fields, and then Owens Field, which is it's a little airport, where you get kind of small planes going in and out of there, but they got hunter-gatherer brewing right outside of it, brewery over there, food, things like that. So there's a lot of neat things around the area that I know a lot of people like. It just feels like one of those clicky areas that a lot of people are flocking to, especially younger, that are looking for this kind of lifestyle. All right, so now we're in the southeast part of Columbia. You're talking about Capitol View, you're talking about Garner's Ferry, even pushing out to Hopkins. And what ChatGPT says about this area is historically it's an overlooked area and it's seen growth with new developments and infrastructure improvements. With land still affordable, it has great investment potential. Let me dive into what pricing looks like in this area so you can see what that average is, and then I'll give you my 2 cents because there's a lot of hype around this area and recent articles actually calling this the next Lexington. All right, so let me give you an idea of pricing when we talk about affordability. So since the beginning of the year, there was a $23,000 gutted house. This isn't just a paint and carpet update house, all the way to a $1,045,000, 4,950 square foot house, an exclusive gated neighborhood. And to give you an idea, there's actually a home that is under contract that was listed for $2,350,000. I mean, I told you Columbia is very diverse when it comes to pricing, but to give you an idea, that average is about $250,000. So again, you can see the variances, but definitely affordable area when you talk about the national average around the country right now. Now, the hype is real in this area. I mean, the local Post and Courier paper just posted an article saying the next Lexington, Southeast Columbia. It looks to be the next Midlands housing market. Now, in my opinion, this starts with price point, right? So first off, you got that price point that is attracting a lot of people to it. Second, military growth. Fort Jackson, just over here. And even just to be 100% honest, Shaw Air Force Base, not too far up the road. As well, as they said, you got a lot of land to be developed. I mean, it's farmland all around me and you see these lots going up for sale. Now, the caveat I say to that, it can take some time as supply versus demand is just as important as growth, right? So there's plenty of room for the supply to keep up with demand versus what we saw in Lexington, where as you've seen, there's just more demand than there is supply out there and the builders can't keep up. And so that's why we see spikes happen there. So I would assume more likely consistent growth as time progresses. And I will poke more holes in their idea that this is the next Lexington, because I do believe there is a next Lexington that we're gonna talk about. There is no Lake Murray, so that's gonna be number one, right? Lake Murray is obviously a big draw to Lexington area. As well, not trying to steer anyone here, please do your research, because obviously there's more to a school rating than niche.com says, but the school ratings on these websites, Great Schools, Niche, over in Lexington, have historically been pretty high. And so that's another growing reason of that area versus, again, what you might see over here in comparison. So that's why I want to poke a little bit of hole in that. But again, with all of that said, room for growth, potential to bring in more shopping, because again, very rural area, got to go back to Garner's Ferry to get. So it's really just kind of an offset, in my opinion, of the downtown, rural area outside of downtown. So where Lexington has that quaint downtown shopping center, downtown Hopkins really doesn't have anything. Even going out to Eastover, there's just 100% honest, you watch my driving video, pretty much abandoned. So your shopping is back Garner's Ferry. So that's why I say you're dependent on the city still. Now, because of the land, plenty of room for growth for them to bring commercial in. But I've always told people the houses come first and the commercial. And so that's why I say I can see the consistency of it with this price point and proximity to so many different things. We'll see as time goes on how fast those prices really climb though, and if it is truly the next hottest area. All right, so what do you think of the list thus far? Are there areas that you're like, yeah, I could definitely see that popping off? Or are there some I'm missing? And locals, chime in. Are these hidden gems? But let's continue on because we got some good ones coming up that you're not gonna wanna miss. All right, so these next two, I'm gonna combine. We're talking about West Columbia and Cayce because they're literally neighbors and there's a lot of commonality between the two. And I'll break this down. But to give you an idea, ChatGPT, starting with Cayce, they say it's located just across the river from downtown Columbia. Cayce has undergone revitalization with new businesses, restaurant, and residential development. It's still affordable, but growing in popularity. West Columbia, it's seen a resurgence with trending restaurants, breweries, and improvements along the Riverwalk. Home prices, they're still reasonable, but the area is becoming a hotspot. Let's dive into this one because this is where the game truly starts to change and we truly are talking about those up and coming, or hey, already started spots. All right, so getting kicked off with pricing. So in Cayce, there was a $20,000 home with a tree that literally fell right through the living room and I believe was in a floodplain, up to a $480,000 home that was 2,872 square feet. But to give you an idea, the average came in right around 240,000. Rolling over to West Columbia, a $40,000 fixer-up, HGTV style, up to an 3,690 square foot home on the Saluda River in the exclusive Quail Hollow. Now, let me give you my 2 cents about the area. Now, before I break this down, what's tricky with a lot of these when they say up and coming areas is you have the city centers, right? You have the city center of West Columbia, and then you have the zip code that makes up West Columbia. Now, West Columbia zip code truly expands all the way past Lexington Medical Center until it literally runs into Lexington itself. Cayce's not as far, but it's still a big area. And my opinion when they're talking about this is a lot about, they're talking about the downtown because that's where we're seeing this big growth and change. And I'm going to dive into that. As well, the other reason is I've talked about this in some of my other videos. I've had clients that say some of those other pockets of West Columbia aren't as great. And so there's a lot of room to grow. But circling back to even this spot where I'm at now, in the downtown area. Again, the reason I combine them with Cayce, don't want to forget about that, is they're both literally right across the river, right next to each other. West Columbia definitely has that transition. I mean, we're truly right around the corner from where I'm standing, where we're seeing a ton of investors come into their downtown area and revitalize old shotgun houses, or truthfully old mill houses is what they were. As well, there was a piece of land where they're talking about new developments. There's not a ton of land to develop per se in the city center, but there was some old land that had just been sitting there and developers came in and they built some fancy new construction homes. As well, there's some of that over in Cayce as well. So you're not seeing, new construction neighborhoods pop up everywhere, but so small revitalizations. So again, it's definitely popping off and changing. Now, I tell people, how long is this transition gonna take? Like I've talked about with all of them. And that's yet to be determined. I mean, obviously from my perspective, I'll give you this. Moving here back in 2015. Yes, downtown Lexington has a lot of revitalization, right? New shops and restaurants coming in. They built the Ice House Amphitheater, as well as building some new restaurants. Then you have Blythewood, where they built Doco Meadows Park and all the stuff we're talking about over there. But literally where I'm standing right now here in West Columbia did not exist when we first moved here, right? This was all vacant land. And yes, you still have the downtown strip right behind me. And there was a couple good restaurants in there, don't get me wrong, right? We went to this place called 118th State, doesn't exist anymore when we first moved here. And then you had Al's upstairs across the street. He since retired. But either way, this complexity and how it's been revitalized with these higher end apartment restaurants overlooking the river. You have breweries, farmers markets, They do events, concerts, and so much more. It's just been massive. Probably the biggest transformation that I've seen since moving here again. And Cayce is just literally on the other side. And they have this very popular neighborhood I've been hearing about since I got into real estate, the Avenues of Cayce. Again, it's going to be those older established neighborhoods, kind of like we saw over in Rosewood, but you still have proximity to downtown Columbia and truthfully right over here to West Columbia. It's not that far because circling back, Cayce's downtown hasn't had as much of the glow up as West Columbia's had. And so yes, you got Steel Hands Brewing that went over there, which is a great brewery to check out. But again, downtown wise, I know we've personally come down here to grab a bite to eat at Black Rooster, come to the Riverwalk and all of that. And so that's why Cayce is just kind of reaping the benefits of what West Columbia has done. We'll see if they have a bit more revitalization as well. And so that's why I combine the two. And again, we're seeing the growth here with my eyes. But keep in mind, I tell people when you're talking about these up and coming areas, and I've had clients in the past that in other cities did this, moved into these up and coming areas. You got a lot of mix when you're transitioning in these areas, right? I had a friend came over wanting me to give an idea about valuation of a house. And you walk over literally right behind where we are. And there's these old houses that they've just been not updated in years. And so you got a half fallen down house that isn't even worth $100,000. We're right across the street. There's this house that they revitalized, turned into an Airbnb and could sell for over $400,000. And so you have to understand that when you're moving in one of these areas, it's in transition. The infrastructure might not be 100%. The schools might not be the top in the States. And this is one of those areas, again, I will say is in transition versus per se a Rosewood where maybe it's freshening up, but not dramatically changing. And definitely more so than Southeast Columbia, where yes, there's new construction popping off, but this is changing the entire dynamics of the area. I mean, again, we've seen more businesses moving over this direction, more investors moving this direction, and tons of young professionals because of the walkability and downtown life, right? These high-end apartments and even the homes right behind, literally you can come walk, grab a bite to eat at some really good restaurants, Black Rooster, Another Broken Egg, Terra as we see behind me, go to the brewery, go to the farmer's market, all within walking distance. This is something I know so many of you ask about. And again, right across the street from downtown Columbia. So whether or not you need to go to the college, you're working at the college, the medical professionals, going to the teaching hospital, Fort Jackson, all of those things Columbia has to offer, but living on this side of the river would truthfully, you know, cheaper Lexington County taxes, but having that proximity. And again, the walkability that I know is such a massive ask of so many people. So you get that benefit feeling more like suburbia with a little bit of that urban touch of walkability. And even more so, right down below me, the Riverwalk. For those, take your bike and you could ride for miles. Again, I know this is something that so many of you ask about, but this area is often overlooked because again, it's still in that transition. The downtown's hot, the area is changing, but there's still some pockets. And that's what you get when you talk about these areas in transition. It's not gonna be the hottest spot. It's working its way to that. It's trying to become that, but you have to understand transition comes with growth pains, comes with challenges, comes with difficulties. But that's the risk versus reward that we talk about when we're talking about up and coming areas. But let's head to the next one because this is another one that again is a game changer. All right, so before we dive into what I truly think could be the next Lexington, because in my 2 cents, West Columbia could be the next Forest Acres with that location of downtown Columbia. But what are your thoughts? Do you think this list is spot on? Or are there some areas missing that you're like, Brandon, this is the next hot spot? Locals, drop your comments below what you're seeing on the ground. All right, so before we dive into this last one, and this one truly, I've seen it personally already starting to shift. I wanna kind of bring up some comments that I know are gonna pop up because as we talked about with some of these areas, pricing matters, right? And that's why maybe we're seeing some pop-up growth expected in the areas. Pricing isn't always the answer, right? Because people say, hey, what about Gaston? What about Prosperity? I'm seeing developers go out this way and build homes. Just because you got budget-friendly housing doesn't necessarily mean everyone's gonna start flocking that way. I mean, there's plenty of areas around the Midlands that I've seen builders going to and building just because they could get land cheap, but the spike hasn't happened. There's usually has to be some type of fundamental shift that draws people to that area outside of builders just building. Yes, some builders have insight, and so that's why they go that direction. Others are just trying to make a buck, and so that's why they throw homes out where they can get it for cheap and they know they can sell them. And so again, a lot of these areas we have to think about what fundamental fundamental shifts are happening that make it pop off. Like I talked about with Southeast Columbia, right? It's really, their downtown is urban Columbia. And so does it take off? Hard to say. Where other areas, like we talked about with Rosewood, yeah, it's an established area and a lot of people like that. And it has proximity to downtown. So there's a lot of perks that can draw that. West Columbia, we've seen the revitalization. We've seen the money pouring in there. So yes, it can happen. And so that's why I say be cautious. Just because houses are cheap and builders are going that way doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the next area to pop off. But let's talk about where I'm at right now, because this shift is happening not only behind the scenes, but in forefront front of us. And I'll talk about that in just a second here. What do I mean by that? And where the other areas, we don't know all the changes that are happening. Some of them are happening behind the scenes. But if you don't know where I'm at right now, we are in Blythewood. And let me give you what ChatGPT says. I'll give you pricing and then I'll talk about my perspective and what I've seen thus far already this year. All right, so ChatGPT says with new neighborhoods and commercial developments, Blythewood is an excellent alternative to Northeast Columbia. It has top-rated schools, larger lot sizes, and a growing community feel. Now let's dive into pricing and then I'll talk about it. All right, so as far as pricing in Blythewood this year, you had everything from a $53,700 1980s mobile home with literally wood paneling up to a $1,100,000 6,785 square foot home on 26.45 acres. Many of y'all's dream, right? But the average, to give you an idea, in Blythewood was $383,648. Now, if you've watched my videos for any sort of time, you know that I've been talking about Blythewood. I mean, well, yes, the announcement of a scout plant did perk this area up. And that's what I'm talking about, the behind the things that turned public, right? We didn't know about scout happening behind the scenes until it was announced, and all of a sudden it was boom, it's coming to Blythewood. Same with Crystal Lagoons. We didn't know that it was coming outside of Blythewood. It was just rumored to the area. That was all happening behind the scenes. But again, there are things that happen in the forefront. And again, that's where I say Blythewood, it's been growing for a long time before that. I mean, I've told people I've sold more homes in Blythewood in the last year, year and a half than I have in all my years prior. And with that said, because you'll say, I know Scout's coming, only one of them that moved to True Blythewood was working at Scout. The rest just fell in love with the area. And let me give you my perspective of the area so you can get an idea if you think this is going to be the next pop-off. So it was a very rural area, but I think they had the mindset of suburbia on the horizon, right? Because different than what we see in Gaston or even in Southeast Columbia, while this area was rural, you had those master plan communities they built out here. Talking about Long Creek Plantation, all around the country clubs, Cobblestone Park with their golf course, Ashley Oaks neighborhood, beautiful estate style homes, and so many more, as well as downtown here, right? Doco Meadows Park, where they host community events, concerts, and so much more. And you got shops and restaurants coming in here. Well, right now, there's not much. Downtown is mostly chain grocery stores, Waffle Houses, wing places. It's set up right off this park to really build this quaint downtown. And they've kind of started the concept of it already. As I always tell people, those houses got to come first and then the businesses follow, which we saw in Lexington, right? Lexington had a quaint downtown, but there weren't really many shops in there when we moved here. A lot of the restaurants kind of moved out. And then that dynamic shift as people shifted to the area, which brings us to the growth. I tell people right now, if you need a Target, a Costco, a Trader Joe's in your backyard, Blythewood isn't it yet. But if you're looking for a little bit more peaceful of an area and don't mind a little bit of a drive to get to shopping, then this is really the area for you. Now, the other big thing I tell people about this area is, as you saw with pricing, this isn't a budget-friendly area. Prices on average, to give you an idea, around the 29072 part of Lexington, we're talking off the lake, so not skewing these numbers, is almost identical to where Blythewood currently is. And then you add in the announcement again of the permits being approved for Crystal Lagoons, 15 minutes from downtown Blythewood. Things are just stacking in the right direction for this area. And again, the developers have taken notice, and they're snatching up as much land as they can. And that's another thing we see over here specifically. There's a lot of good land for them to develop these master plan communities. I mean, we've seen Grand Arbor with Pulte, the neighborhood they're building, as well their announcement of half-acre lots right behind us. Whereas, you know, in Lexington, you get a lot of these 60-acre neighborhoods, 40-acre neighborhoods, kind of tiny little places. And for those then concerned saying, well, it's just gonna turn into a traffic nightmare like Lexington overnight. Keep in mind, 2906, the Blythewood zip code, has a population density of 335 people per square mile, where Lexington's 29072 zip code is 1,005 people per square mile. So it's a long ways from Sunset Boulevard traffic. And the town truly has the opportunity to mitigate infrastructure along the way as they're seeing these developments popping up, versus what it feels like in Lexington, where they're chasing their tails. And of course, the last reason this area hits the map, and why I'd say is more likely to be the next Lexington than Southeast Columbia, sorry, it's reality, is how the sites rank Blythewood schools. I mean, you saw even ChatGPT brought that up. I'm just saying, I talk to people weekly about moving here, and they tell me what they read and what they care about. So answer me this, do you think the pricing for Blythewood is already a little bit too high, where it can't really pop up that much higher? You can't foresee people paying more than the prices you're already seeing in the Ashley Oaks types neighborhoods and Cobblestone Park? Or is this truly the next Lexington? Again, did I miss a neighborhood? Is there another neighborhood that you're like, you know what, Brandon, you're way off base. You missed the best one. Let me know, because again, while it's great to read all these articles and make all these guesses, like I said, I don't have a crystal ball. A lot of my insights come from reading what's coming to the area when you hear about these announcements of different developments, as well as listening to y'all every single week. The things that you tell me are important to you. In the back of my mind, I start picturing areas and neighborhoods. And after a while, you start to get a commonality of what people ask for. And so that's why these are my thoughts on these ones. And again, if you're just learning about the area, you're gonna wanna check out this playlist here. We'll actually break down the area a little bit further. So you can kind of see, okay, you say Blythewood isn't the mix of it all. Well, how far is it really? What's closer if I need to be closer to shopping? Where is Trader Joe's? Where is Costco? Where are all these places if I wanna be right smack in the middle of it? So check out this playlist, otherwise reach out when you're ready.